We will start the work session of the Pinehurst Village Council for May 10th, 2022. Those of you in the hall, if you wish to keep speaking to each other, you can go into the foyer, that's fine. But we'll get to the meeting, get the meeting started right now. The only piece of business on the work session is continued discussion of the short-term rental policies. We'll go through this agenda, discuss those updates and the short-term rentals, and move to a closed session upon completion of the work session. We've received an updated matrix from Darren Burke just before the meeting here, which goes over some changes I think that were mentioned this afternoon and discussed by some of the council members. And I'd like to focus on that, on the matrix as we did the last time. And I'd like to start by focusing really on the land use issues and options that are on the matrix as we have it. Darren, that is on the screen, right? You've got the up. Yeah, okay, fine, so people can see that as well. There are four, well, let's do this. We've been working on the definition as well as on the land uses. And I think Darren has got a definition here that's very much where we left off last time and was a consensus of the council. But we'll look at that and then move through options 2, 3, and 4, and 5, and then go into the rest of the matrix. But Darren, would you like to introduce the definition idea, please?
Sure. And this document, Kelly, you'll be able to upload this.
And you're going to speak with your lapel?
Yeah, it should be.
Okay. I'll make sure that the room can hear as well as those listening in.
I think my collar's messed up. All right. So for the land use definition, what we had kind of come to consensus on was and we've had this discussion, in order for us to regulate these types of uses, and it is a type of use, we have to actually define it within our ordinance. And the proposal is to define STRs as whole house and less than 30 days of consecutive rental. That's pretty much in line with most of the other ordinances that we've seen. It's 30 days or less than 30 days. So that's what we've been, that is the proposal that's before us, or that you've come to a consensus on. We had some discussions on, whether we could exclude creating a grace period or having certain name periods. So we left it on the list. We think it's a problematic thing for us to define, but we kept it on we kept it on the list because we don't know, do you do it? It's something that would require some further research. We just think it's a little bit more problematic to define or to exclude just a 14-day period, especially without. It'd be easier if we had a registration requirement. So if we could register and we say, well, it kicks in after 14 days, your short-term rental. But if we just exclude a 14-day without a corresponding permit requirement, it does get a little bit difficult for us to enforce or allow that 14 days. So we'll keep it on the list, but it needs some more. We need to think through that a little bit better, a little bit more.
Now, the 14-day is what you're talking about.
Correct.
Do you think through that a little bit more, how it relates to 30? Okay, I understand that. Now, don't we need to refer somewhere to what whole house means? And how would we do that as far as this definition? I'd like to make sure that we define that as part of the definition.
Well, whole house, when you see the whole house used, it's usually along with homestay. So it's the counter to the homestay. The homestay is where the owner stays at the house. The opposite of that is whole house, we would just have to flesh out that definition just a little bit more to make it clear. It's a standalone house where, and the STR is in that standalone house, and it's for 30 days or less. So we just gotta add a little bit more to that actual definition. Yeah. But I think we're on the right page. We're on the right track with how council had wanted to go, 30 days or less, and just we can continue to refine and add clarity to that.
Okay. Are there any questions from council about the definition here, and is that we headed in the right direction on that? Any suggested changes to that, or concerns. Lydia?
I only had a question, enforceability without a permit requirement. Help me think through that. If we can't get permits, how do we enforce this?
That's why it's a con, because I haven't thought through how to enforce it yet.
I don't understand your question.
Okay, if this says the con is we cannot enforce it without a permit, and we can't require permits. So my question is, how can we enforce this? And if we can't enforce something, it seems like a logical question is, can we do it?
What
I think-
is it that you
I think
can't
there's two
enforce?
things
What are we
going on
talking
here,
about?
though.
The
Wait a minute.
definition?
Wait a minute, Jeff?
I think there's two things going on here. Darren can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the concern about enforceability with regard to this, the actual definition, is the 14-day grace period.
That is part of it, correct?
Yeah, I see what you're.
Otherwise, this is just a definition of a land use
I
that we
think-
would use to enhance our regulatory
Exactly.
authority.
Yeah, Lydia's.
Yes, that was.
But Lydia's
That's
correct
correct.
about, there's no,
It says, it seems like, I don't know, and I'm trying to come up with an analogy. If you enact an ordinance but you can't enforce it, then why go through the,
well, I think we have to get to the next step.
Okay.
Well, first is the definition, then I guess if we go to
And-
the next
and
step,
the-
we can get towards enforcement.
In all of these cases, we're not suggesting that without a permit, you can't enforce it. We're suggesting that without a permit, it's harder to enforce it.
Correct. And I think you see that throughout a lot of these standards, it's going to be hard. We say enforceability without a permit. We're not, it's Jeff saying, we're not saying we can't do it, we're just trying to figure out how would we actually enforce that using our regulatory processes.
And-
We have,
And I would add to that, it is still not clear that we cannot require a permit.
And here's the other thing, Lydia.
Jane, before you do that, I'm sorry. And just for my education, maybe others, Jeff, you're saying that it's still not clear about the permit issue based upon the Schroeder-Wilmington case, I think. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay, thank you. Jane, sorry.
All we're doing in option one is defining the land use we're talking about. And this whole house rental is a very common definition in the STR world. It's the definition that the Wilmington court used, and we can, and a lot of the towns across North Carolina use that concept. And we're not in item one saying what that land use can do or can't do. But if you think of a retail store, we define retail store in our PDO, but you don't have to have a special permit in order to operate one. What the PDO does is it says you can put a retail store in the neighborhood commercial zone, but not in the office professional zone. So we don't need to worry about permits just to get through this option one definition.
correct.
Okay, good. So I think we have that pretty well determined. Let's move on to the land uses. I had considerable difficulty kind of working through the short-term definitions we had a couple weeks ago in this document. And there have been some changes which are marked in red here, which to me make it a lot clearer about what we mean, especially in uses number 2 and 3. So I appreciate that was done. And if we can, I'm hopeful that we can get down to a couple of land uses tonight, or a single if we could agree on that, among the 4 that are still there. Jane, you had some of this wording is, I think, something you suggested, but maybe working with Darren as well.
I did.
Would you like to explain that a little bit, and
Yes,
then we'll talk about the
let me
others?
try. Darren has options 2, 3, 4, and 5, which are all different ways of saying where can you use this particular land use that we defined up in 1 somewhere in the village. And I was a little confused, I have to admit, reading through Darren's 4 different options. So I revamped it a little bit. I figured one option could be we can say you can't do it anywhere in the village, but I kind of set that one aside. I don't think we're going to do that. Then I said, well, let's have one that says you can use it in any residential zone, which is now what number 2 says, except that we are going to have some of these enhanced enhanced standards, additional things like the parking and so forth and so on that we're going to talk about later. So they would be allowed in all residential zoning districts with the regulatory standards that are going to come in our next tier of options to talk about. Number 3 says, instead of allowing them in all residential zoning districts, we would allow them, well, what Darren is saying is, we would not allow them in single-family residential districts, but we would allow them in multifamily districts. And he's saying that with respect to
Well, there's two,
this is the mirror image, and you haven't written it down, but it was in mine.
yeah, it was.
That they would be allowed in the multifamily districts with the enhanced standards, the parking and the yada yada that we're going to talk about in the next tier of options. But that they would be prohibited in single-family residential districts after an amortization period of 2 years, during which they could still operate, but they would have those enhanced standards. The parking and so forth would apply during that 2-year time.
And let me,
Is that clear?
and there's 2 concepts in here. The concept number 1, the prohibit, let me move that down. The prohibit and the amortize in all residential single-family districts, that was the original one for mine. And then I added today amortize in. So that was a change, prohibit and amortize. Jane's suggestion was, I worked on that and I added that to the bottom, prohibit in all single-family residential zoning districts, what you just said. So they're two different kind of concepts that are saying similar things. Mine was the top one, and then Jane was working on off the second one.
Okay, so you've got 2 ideas in number 3?
That's right. I see. You,
Yeah, no,
you,
I don't think that's helpful.
okay. Yeah, I see, Darren. You kept what was number 3 and added in the
Correct.
suggested, so there's really 2 things going on here.
Correct.
I get your point.
They both say similar things, but Jane's is a little bit more expansive than the first one. Prohibit and amortize in all residential single-family districts. You were a little bit more, you add the 2-year time period in it, things like that, but
Well, your
the concept.
What's the difference between your first and your second sentence?
Well, the difference is the time period.
Yeah.
Okay, so why don't we just go with the red sentence? And because
Well, I wasn't going to eliminate the first one without us having a discussion first, so I added.
But I think we need to put the other half of it in, which is that they would be allowed
Yeah.
in the multifamily districts with the enhanced standards.
And we've been working, and most of our discussion has been targeted directly or discussed, focused on single-family districts. I think I haven't added that in there, but I think we've all understood that in the multiple family districts, such as the condos, things like that, that was going to be the direction.
And I played with some numbers over the weekend coming from the 2017 land use fiscal analysis of how many multifamily dwelling units do we have compared to single-family dwelling units. About 15% of our dwelling units are multifamily right now. And if you look at the number of short-term rentals we have, and I went on the VRBO website over the weekend because they say we have so many rentals listed with us, and this many of them are multifamily condos or apartments, and this many of them are single-family. So I tried to figure out what is the concentration of them in, if you extrapolate out and everything, because VRBO doesn't have them all, but if you use that ratio and extrapolate out, there's something like 8% of our multifamily dwelling units are short-term rentals, but less than 1% of our single-family are. So it makes sense, if you're going to keep them in the multifamily, because that's where they're concentrated now.
Can I ask one minor question?
Yeah.
Why would we exclude them from neighborhood commercial, office professional, village mixed use?
Well, do any of those, some of those definitions or zoning definitions allow today, right? Some of them may not, but you're pointing out that maybe, Jeff,
It says allow in residential zoning districts, right? There's no discussion about our commercial districts.
Maybe
Good
we,
point.
maybe we can turn around the discussion a little bit. First of all, I think it's a non-starter, number two. If you allow something everywhere, then you don't have to worry about the concentration anywhere, because that means it's the Wild West if everything is allowed everywhere.
Pat, you're going to use your microphone and not turn too much, I'm afraid, okay? Thank you.
Okay, so I don't think that's just confusing. We're going to allow them in zoning districts, but with enhanced standards. I think our enhanced standards should apply as soon as possible, and they should apply everywhere. That should be a community-wide enhanced standard. And getting to what Jeff is saying, the way I've been thinking this through is that we would restrict them in single-family residential zoned areas. The other areas, the mixed use, the multifamily areas, I mean, that's not single residential, number one.
Yeah,
That's not where
that's true.
that's not where we get the gist of the complaints. And so we would allow them in those areas, but there's these enhanced standards that have to be filed wherever they are. So, I mean, because
Yeah.
I think that's what you're saying, is how can we slice the salami so that it's,
I was just calling attention to the fact that
No, that's
none of these
that's
options
fine.
allow for them in the mixed-use zoning districts, which, I mean, that seems to me like that's the first place you'd allow them.
yeah.
Because
Mixed
there's
use even
commercial,
before
right?
multifamily.
So
That's fine. There aren't that many residential units in the commercial zones, though, are there?
that's true, but they are permitted.
No, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they
so
are permitted.
in
There's
office
some-
Great. Okay,
office
fine.
professional, neighborhood commercial,
lump that in
VMU,
under
there are residential
multifamily.
uses that are permitted in all those districts, so.
Okay.
That's a good catch. We would want to include that.
That's fine.
All right, so with respect to this option number 3, as we're talking about it,
Well,
Jeff?
let's chat option number 2 a little bit.
Go
Okay.
ahead. And I
Option
want
number
to talk about
2,
3
that
and
you said was a
4 and 5 as
non-starter.
well.
I disagree with you. The problem we have on there is that now you create winners and losers. And so that's a ban, is what that is, because you're banning it in different areas right now where they currently are. So the idea there is that you have a bunch of folks who have purchased homes that are using it short-term rentals, and the ripple effect is going to require them basically to potentially sell them, okay, that they're going to have to get rid of those, okay? That's a pretty big impact.
Well, not when you figure out how many homes these are. There are, we found out that,
If you're the person who owns the home, if you're the person who's making a living with that, you're talking about taking people's livelihoods away.
and I'm saying, how many are those there?
I don't know.
Well, I understand.
Do you?
I'm just telling you, I have a good idea. I have a good idea because I believe 50% of the short-term rental units are owned by people from out of state who don't even visit here. That's based on my email traffic from Santa Monica, California. from Los Angeles, from Seattle, from Chicago, from Brooklyn.
How about the other 50%?
Okay, so the other
Okay,
50%?
so even if your numbers are correct there, my point is, you are going to make a decision that's going to dramatically affect a significant portion of our residents.
I disagree with your word significant. That's my
Okay.
issue.
Well, I guess I look at it with somebody who is taking the risk to purchase a house, to build it up, to run it correctly, and we've got a lot of these that are being run correctly, and you are going to take it and you're going to say that they are no longer allowed to run that property. Okay? Now, I understand the whole idea here, and I'm very compassionate towards the effects of the community. I'm very compassionate towards the people that they're talking about being, late at night and stuff like that. But that's going to be handled by, we're talking about the increased standards and regulations. We talked about having a program here in which there's some non-regulatory, self-regulating type of stuff that occurs, okay, where their community is getting together and they're trying to put standards amongst their own group. I think we ought to be trying some of that stuff. But what you're talking about here is a trade-off. It's not a solution. What you're going to do is you're going to trade off a series of people who are running legitimate businesses in there. And they're running it, and they are doing it within the laws of what they've had.
Trade-offs are often part of any solution, okay? There is, I mean, at least in negotiations I've been in, that's how that works. Trade-offs are part of the solution.
Well, it's a part of your answer maybe, but it's not a solution across the board. You're going to dramatically affect some people. So what you have done is you have now, if this goes through, and you end up saying, okay, number 2 is off it, and you go with number 3, which is kind of what I'm getting the impression that it's leading towards.
No, I'm not,
okay.
I'm just taking
But if you go do that, understand that you have just written off a series of people that are trying hard to take care of properties and legitimately live in this community. All right?
Jeff, I think, I take your point on that. There's economic impacts or something we need to consider. However, there's this amortization idea of over a couple of years. So I don't know that the economic impact of selling houses is going to all happen in a 2 or 3 or 4 month time. It's going to happen over a couple of years, which through market cycles and whatnot is certainly a time frame that I don't think in the residential housing market is going to affect that much compared to other factors that might be in effect too.
I wouldn't want to be in that scenario. If I had a home and I'm now effectively I can't maintain it anymore because I can't pay for it, so I'm going to have to sell it, and I'm in a situation where a bunch of other people are selling their homes also. That's not a great time. This is going to lower the property values. Okay, there's peer-reviewed evidence that talks about when you take away short-term rentals, you're going to drop the property values in the community. This is going to hurt a lot of other people other than just short-term rental folks. So I go back to the point of, and we've listened to lots of people discuss things, and they say we don't want a ban, but we want regulations that bring people in line. And I concur with that. I want to bring them in line. But what number 3 will do for you is it's going to create a ban in certain areas.
In certain areas. I think that is inaccurate. Just like there's a ban in Pine Wild.
I understand.
Okay, that's a certain area.
Okay.
Okay.
But that again, that was established.
It was established.
On there, and it was established when the community was first developed.
It was.
From an HOA.
And they must have had a reason when they established that.
Okay. So but then.
It had to do with the quality of life of the community.
You guys, we make I am blown away with the assumptions we keep making that are serving as the basis for decisions. And I want to say, I want people to hear me. I'm not pro short-term rental. I'm not against short-term rental. I'm trying to find a solution. And there are people who are passionate on both sides, and they have so much to say and so many ideas. And I know Phil met with some of them last week, and but we're saying things that have zero factual basis, and if ever we needed factual basis, it's now. And, Jeff, you just said something, if we whatever. I don't even know where we're going with this, because I feel like it's government coming up with a solution, or government, I guess a solution, rather than the people who are living it every day. And they are the ones, the short-term rental people, the ones I'm listening to who are very passionate seem to be willing to agree to some of these, I don't know what we call them,
regulations and,
Well, where it affect, the cars, I
Right.
don't want to speak for them, but that I have heard again and again, we are open to having some form of regulation. And, another thing too, and I think, Phil, I've heard this from you, I have gone through the trouble of just about every single email we've gotten, every single public speaker, public comments, and I've totaled them up, and we've had 263 people for short-term rentals and some reasonable regulations, and we've had about 50. And I know that this is not, this is not statistically valid, but there's so many people out there who believe in this. And Pat, to your point about people writing from, my husband owned 2 short-term rentals. We lived in San Francisco. You would have gotten a letter from us from San Francisco, and you can't rule us out because we had short-term rentals here with the San Francisco, and we lived in San Francisco.
I'm not ruling you out. I'm just saying that if you live in San Francisco and you own a short-term rental here in Pinehurst and you rent it out and you live there, you don't have a skin in the game in this.
Well, I was
community.
paying property
There is no
taxes.
skin in the game.
Now,
That's what the quality of life issue is about.
But there's a whole, let me tell you what, there are peer review articles out there about quality of life. But my point is, I'm still, I think I said 2 weeks ago, my brain cannot fit this matrix. And for the past probably 6 weeks, I've said it again and again, I have been on a listening tour, listening to both sides. They're both passionate. And to come to them with something like this, I'm thinking, I don't know where we're going with this. If it's a local bill, I'm not sure with this kind of controversy that we're hearing that that's going to be acceptable. I think there are enough people out there who are willing to work toward this, and I've said it for the past few weeks. I wish we could let them find a solution rather than giving them the council and staff crafted whatever and say, here, I don't know, this is.
well, Lydia, I would have to say, though, that, through the emails, as you've just said, and all the public comment in person over the last couple of months, I think we, as a village council, have to make a decision, and we're doing that based upon all the input that we have received. So where we're going with this is to get to the point of having an agreed strategy and an agreed policy of how we're going to regulate or not short-term rental properties in the village of Pinehurst. That's what we're tasked to do. We can't, I understand the idea of trying to get, and I think through public input we are receiving, input from both sides to help us make a good decision. And we're hearing from those camps of people and different ideas of what we might do. But we're the ones that have to make the decision. And that's what we have to be moving on with this. So at some point, we have to come to where we're going to go with the primary focus of this legislation.
Well, and you said something that just stuck with me is all the input we received, and I'm not sure we've received valid factual input. We'll hear something and then I'll go check into it, and actually what we heard wasn't true, or there's another side to the story. And so I think it seems to me we just don't, and I asked Jeff this 2 weeks ago, we have prided ourselves on making fact-based decisions. And we do the community survey where we get statistically valid input. And so I know all these numbers I just read out to you, that is not statistically valid, but to me it's an indication of the real strong feelings out there of people who own or manage or work in short-term rentals and believe the economic impact. I mean, I think the economic impact is real, but I mean, Phil Sonia's the expert on that, but I can't tell you what it is. I know it's real, and I think that's something more we need to consider as we do this. I'm just concerned that we are going down a path that I'm not sure what our end game is, and I'm not sure, and the people who are impacted that are getting in touch with us are going to buy into it, so there's more turmoil. And
Well, let me suggest something, if I may.
sure,
We've got a whole bunch of people on one side and a whole bunch of people on the other side.
I would say a
okay?
whole bunch and a
Just
few.
All right. And one side is saying, oh, our economic rights. Well, the other side has economic rights too, because they've been living in a residential neighborhood and all of a sudden they've had the rug pulled out from under them, and now it isn't residential anymore, now it's got a bunch of businesses in it. So they're upscuffled too, all right? And I don't think we can just go and ignore that
not.
situation. So we've got to do something, and it's our job to do. And we're listening to all these people, and that's all fine and large. But it's our job in the end to do. So we can't just sit here and do nothing and wait for who? A few people who pop up in the chairs to come and make a decision and hand it to us? That's not going to happen.
Well,
So here's what I've been looking at. The logical, ordinarily, the logical common ground, middle ground, when you've got one set who does want it and the other set who doesn't want it, would be to have effective regulation that would get to the nub of the problem. And the nubs of the problem are the uncertainty and the loss of a sense of security and the loss of the sense of community that's going on in those private residential neighborhoods, okay? And we can't get at that with the scraps of regulatory authority that we have left. All we can get at are things like parking. And Darren's got a list, God bless him, he's got a wonderful long list of good ideas, but we can't enforce any of them. We can't enforce the number of short-term rentals overall in the community. We can't limit that. We can't limit how many short-term rentals there would be on any given street or in any given neighborhood. We can't limit, we can't address adequate management. Many people have come in and said, well, I do a good job of management, I do a good job of management, but a lot of people aren't doing a good job of management because otherwise we wouldn't be hearing all these complaints. So but we can't address that either. We can't even do inspections to make sure that for fire safety and sanitation and things that protect the tenants who are in there. So we don't have the ability to do that. All we have the ability to do, and this was specifically held in the Wilmington decision. The Wilmington decision held that restricting short-term rentals, having a definition of what they are, and restricting them by district so that you don't have to register. They don't, a property owner doesn't have to come in and say, I declare myself to be operating a short-term rental. You don't want to make somebody do that. You just say, blanket, for this district, you can do it or you can't do it, just like they do for retail stores. You can do it in the NC zone. You can't do it in the OP zone, all right? That's where I've been coming from. I don't see how we can effectively have this middle ground that would ordinarily be where we would go and where Darren has shown us here are the lumpy things that we want to be able to regulate, but we can't enforce. We can't even necessarily permit. So we're stuck. And we're stuck because somebody at the General Assembly wrote something that turned out to be not the right way for towns and counties to be able to manage this in a flexible manner. We have no flexibility. So what are we going to do? Are we going to abandon our residential neighborhoods and tear the fabric of those communities? Or are we going to say, you can't have them anywhere? No, I don't want to do that. It seems to me, and it's not perfect, it isn't, but it seems to me that the closest we can come to humane is to allow them where there is the most concentration in the multifamily and commercial, where people sort of expect more, that there's going to be rentals. You know, you're going to rent a condo for a while you're getting your floors repaved or your kitchen redone or something like that, you know. And we protect the single-family residential neighborhoods.
What do you say to the families, the thousands of families who come here for, U.S. Kids? This is just one example. The thousands of families who come here with kids for U.S. Kids Golf and want a house.
Well, this is interesting because I went back and looked at the 2017 land use fiscal analysis, my favorite document. And that talked about the different types of residential and different types of commercial uses that we have and how they work and how they operate. And it spent a lot of time talking about how single-family residential units have was it 22% or 23% vacancy rate, something like that. They're mostly full of people. But that the multifamily units have a 68% vacancy rate. 68%. What they actually mean by that, it turns out, which I didn't understand at the time, is that they are not a permanent, 68% of them are not a permanent residence. They're somebody's second home or something like that. And so therefore, they're more available for the short-term rental kind of thing, because you're not going to do a short-term rental with your personal home. I mean, maybe for the US Open, but that's about it. You know what I mean? You're going to be living there. So there was really no mention in the 2017 land use fiscal analysis about short-term rentals. They weren't talked about. So there may have been a few of them out there, but they were not on anybody's radar. In the 2019 Comprehensive Plan of Development, we have one half of a page 127, that says short-term rentals. We're starting to get some. Maybe we better look into how we're going to handle them in the future. So it's only really been, I think it really took off in COVID, you know, and before that time, we have had people coming here to participate in tournaments and so forth all these years.
US Kids Golf
and
is
it's
brand new.
itself out. So, and I'm not suggesting that we not have short-term rentals anywhere in the village by any stretch. I'm talking about keeping them in the places where they have the highest concentration now, but protecting our single-family residents. And one more thing, and I'll shut up. And that is, your 250, you've said 260, I got 250, email messages from pro short-term rental. I went back through the Moore County tax records, because about, out of that 250, 113 of them gave Village of Pinehurst street addresses. The rest of them said they were from Southern Pines or Eagle Springs or out of state or something. And I don't know, 6 or 8 of them were VOP post office boxes. But I went and looked at the street addresses, and on the county tax records, they will tell you not the address of the property in question that they're giving the information for, and then they'll tell you the name of the owner, and they'll tell you the mailing address for the owner, where they mail the tax bill to. So I went to see how many of them did the name and the mailing address for the tax bill match up with the property, and it was only 53 of them. So that means that of those 250 pro short-term rental, 21% live in Pinehurst. I just, you know, I'm just going to.
But, and Jane, to that point, as you
That's
go
a
through
big
this, some of them were just the blanket things, but they had points that are valid. The economic impact, the jobs that will be lost, which I guess is economic impact. And just in going through all of this and listening, and I think my point is that we find that a middle ground be found. I'm concerned we're going down a path, and eventually we're going to have public hearings that are going to make this undone, or we're going to try to do a local bill, and that's not going to work because there's so much controversy. I think the safer approach is to find the middle ground. And you've said it, I've said it. You're not going to make everybody happy. And, you know, one thing that's been frustrating to me is I feel like those who are pro short-term rental are willing to be regulated. You've got some over here that are so anti-short-term rental. Because I'm in the middle, I'm considered pro short-term rental. I'm not. I'm trying to find a solution that will not work for everybody, that will minimize the controversy down the road as we try to implement this. We don't want a lawsuit.
Lydia, I'll try to help you finish your sentence there, because I understand your concern, and I share that to some degree. But the common ground, the middle ground, as Jane has pointed out, I guess I'd draw an analogy back to that, or comparison back to that. We are in a situation where, unfortunately, we don't have the ability to get to a middle ground. If one thing were allowed by the legislature, that would be the permitting, registration idea. If we could do that, I think that would solve a lot of problems. Both sides could work with that a bit. Not exactly sure how the details would be worked out, but I think they could be. But we don't have that. And so one of the things that I hope we can do in making a decision here on which alternative we're going to follow is to, once we've done that, to, through the local bill, if we can, or through continued work with our state representatives and others in the legislature, explain this problem in a way that they might understand how they could change one thing and it would probably help the whole situation. But we just don't have the ability to do that. And that's very frustrating for everybody here.
Might I jump in?
That's what Jeff's talking about, Please?
And
Don, I think what you just said is very powerful, and I've had this thought for quite some time. I think the common ground, if we can all get behind, everybody, short-term rental owners and non-short-term rental owners and the village council, a local bill that clarifies that we can require a permit.
And Jeff, I'm not, I can't speak for the short-term rental owners. To me, that sounds reasonable, but I haven't had that discussion with them. Phil might have had that discussion with some of them. I think that is a reasonable, me personally, this is just me, this is not Lydia having spoken to a lot of people, but I think a permit would be a reasonable thing to do.
I agree.
Well, I think one of the speakers tonight, who was in favor of the rental, short-term rental program, mentioned just, register us and do things like that. This person wasn't aware that we're not able to do that, and
But the point is,
will be now.
the Wilmington decision told us we can't do that.
Correct. But
Because we couldn't register, and it certainly implies we can't permit. And the people who were very happy about that were not the people complaining about short-term rentals.
It didn't
They were
imply
the
that-
people who own them.
It didn't apply that we couldn't.
Your local bill, you
implied
can
that
do anything.
It would be a matter for future court
Well, that's right.
action to resolve.
Yeah.
it also, it didn't limit them from voluntarily
Yeah.
permitting themselves.
And we
So,
could do
so
that.
if there is a matter in which you can get the organization or get a third-party organization in which they're working together and start working on those regulations and be effectively permitting
How would
themselves.
would this third-party organization be an arm of a government, or who would set it
No.
up?
No, I think that's probably would violate the whole permitting thing if it was an arm of the government.
Well, I think it's something,
not gonna put
it
these
could be,
people
if it was
together like
voluntary, we could suggest that, maybe village
I think we
council
suggested that 2 weeks ago.
But-
And
but- But
Jeff Sanborn.
if such an organization would be in favor of a volunteer permitting requirement, why would they want to be saddled with the hassle of trying to administering that? In other words, if they think that a permitting solution is the right middle ground, then just support our efforts to get that clarification
done.
in a local bill
Right.
from the
Right.
General Assembly.
I have no problem.
I agree.
Again, I've got no
So-
problem. If the General Assembly gives permitting, I think that would solve a lot of issues.
Oh,
I support that.
if Tom McGinnis and Jamie Bowles believed that this community was okay with registering short-term rentals, it would go in a local bill.
I think they would, well, we've had those discussions just very recently.
But then the next step is, okay, you make us register, and then what? It's got to be more than just registering, I would think. Or maybe register, so then implement the safe, then we could do the inspections
Point
for
is, we
safety.
already have all these other regulatory
Yeah, we're going to,
authorities that are that are difficult to provide enforcement on without
Some
full
process,
knowledge of what properties need to be regulated, right?
yeah, yes.
But we have the authority to do these other things that are below this land use
Yeah.
stuff on the document.
Once we know where they are.
And aren't particularly onerous.
Well, and, you know,
That we
and
can use to create that middle ground.
You know, I'm so sympathetic to Pete Green. I drive by that house at least twice every day, and I see all the cars. It is a mini hotel in a neighborhood, and I can understand how that bothers him. I can understand how it bothers others, but what's the solution to that? I don't know. If registration is a start, I don't know. But I'm so sympathetic to what they're saying. I just don't know how to effectuate change that is good for this community and good for the entire community, not just, this is about neighborhoods. This is about quality neighborhoods.
Have to be able to
Exactly.
regulate the occupancy. We can't even inspect, you know? So how are we going to, we have a bed and breakfast regulation in the BDO. And it's interesting to read the standards for that, which are in the section 8.5 table of uses. It's one of those
Yeah.
SRs, which means something, who knows what, underneath. And that regulates each, how many guest rooms you can have, the fact that the owners have to be on site, each guest room has to have its own bathroom, each guest room has to have a fire egress, signage, parking, can't sell alcohol, yada, yada, all these things, which if we had that set of standards for our short-term rentals, but we can't do it. We can't do it. Because my opinion, somebody at the General Assembly decided to give a break, and it's turned out to put the towns in such a terrible position that we can't do reasonable regulation right now. So yes, if we can get a local bill that says we're able to do local, but I don't want to wait around for a year before we find out if we get that or not. I think we've got to act now, and the thing about having the amortization period is, if we say, we have to go through the different public hearings and so forth to amend our PDO, but we go through that, and so let's say we get out to, I don't know, July 1 or something, and we've enacted something that says we're putting a ban in place in the single-family residential zones, and I'm talking hypothetically here, okay, that is going to go into effect on August 1, 2024. So there's going to be a 2-year period during which anybody and his dog can operate a short-term rental. No registration, no nothing. We'll have our standards, the parking, the whatever, the little shreds we can do. And then at the end of that 2-year period, then the restriction would become effective. But in that 2-year period, maybe we'll get somewhere with the...
Now, Jane, based on what I'm hearing, if I'm hearing correctly, what you're proposing could subject us to a lawsuit. Are you willing to take on that risk?
Well, if we
Jane
do
can answer that
nothing-
if she wants, and
And I only say that because amortizing them out of neighborhoods is, to Jeff's point, you're telling somebody who's I know I've talked to one short-term rental, a person, she bought a house for like $1 million. She has poured a fortune into it. It's gorgeous. And the house, the long-term residents on either side and across the street have run-down houses. And so you're telling somebody who's spent $1 million plus in a house, she's redone it, and now you're going to say, sorry, in 2 years you can't do it anymore. I think that is going to subject us to some risk. And
Okay.
we would have to understand that risk.
Look, whatever we do is going to subject us to risks. But our job as elected officials is to take certain risks. If we're always going to be hesitant because someone might sue us, we are going to be just in paralysis from being worried about lawyers. There's a million lawyers in the country, someone will sue us. That's the reality of any legislation that takes place anywhere. So my gosh,
Okay,
we've been elected to solve the problem. We're here tonight discussing this, not because the short-term rental owners and the commercial investors from around the country have come to us and said, please take this issue on. We are here tonight because that community hasn't said anything for 5 or 6 years. And we started hearing intensely from the residents in the single-family districts for the last 6 months. That's what's brought us here, not the
Agreed.
short-term rental community.
I don't disagree with you. I don't disagree with you. And I'm just trying to find a solution that will guarantee high-quality neighborhoods. If it's a registration process with some other things that go along with registration, and we can get some buy-in from both sides on that, could that be the best of, could that be a viable solution?
All right, look. Jeff Morgan, is that you, or Jeff?
That was me, if you don't mind. me.
All right, and then I'd like to focus back on some of the, go ahead, please, Jeff.
Yeah, there's the potential that if you take a more,
Restrictive?
more restrictive
Absolutely.
action, like prohibiting in certain zoning actions, it might result in a legal case. And probably hear from Mike on that later. There's also the possibility, maybe a probability, that if we take an action that members of the General Assembly think is too restrictive, the end result is we're going to wind up with less authority. And in the long game, that's a worse outcome.
Again, you spelled out another risk. But
But I'm not sure Jeff had finished his point on that.
That was my point. In the long game, that's a worse result because
Takes away all authority. To
Yeah, I
me,
mean,
what
we-
you're
we-
saying, they say,
have
sorry.
a fairly good understanding of what our authorities are now. There's some question about this permitting thing, right? But if we get a local bill that resolves that, we think that we're in a pretty good situation that we might be able, maybe to craft a
Right.
solution that everybody can agree with. Or we could take a more restrictive approach and have our authorities completely yanked out from underneath us.
But the community that was most happy by the Wilmington decision was the short-term rental owner community. The very people that you're saying, and hopefully we could all work together and say, let's permit or let's register. They've won their case on that. I mean, I'm not advising them, but if you've won your case in court, why are you going to start sort of negotiating with yourself? You've got a winner. And if you think that the council does something that is not within its legal authority, and I think our legal authority by the Wilmington decision is exactly, they're telling us, you got zoning legal authority. That's all you can do, basically, more or less. If that's the case, what are we going to do?
The Wilmington decision said you may not require registration.
Yes,
Or
It
permitting.
did not resolve the question of whether or not you could
permitting.
require permitting.
Permitting, right,
You know, something.
to
I
define
had-
differently. Now,
Something,
what I'd like to do though is this. We have 4 options here of sort of the base case of what we could do. I think we're mostly focused on 2 and 3, and I would divide 3 into 2 parts, A and B, because Darren suggested there, and I think we agreed to. So I'm talking about the red part of the matrix 3, which says prohibit in all single-family residential zones. You got that, all right. So I think it's 2, and I'll call it 3B, that we want to focus on, and maybe there's some combination of that we would be able to work out. But does anybody have any interest in what is called options 4 and 5?
No.
I don't think we do, and I just want to get those off the table. So, all right, so now we know that with certain definition, perhaps, option 2 and what I'll call option 3B are where we're focused, okay? Now, I think that's a major step forward, and we would have a lot of work to do on that, and we would need to figure out how this might flow through the local bill, and we're going to get to that discussion in a few minutes. But if you would agree that we'll use 2 and 3B as kind of our focus areas of the overall approach, then I think we'd spend a little bit of time looking at the other enforcement-related parts of the matrix, which are pretty straightforward, and we honed this down 2 weeks ago. I don't know that there's a lot of discussion on that tonight, but if anybody wants to talk about any one of those options, 6 through 18 or whatever, we'll do that now.
Can I be
then
sure
we-
that
we can-
what you're asking is, when you say 2 and 3B?
Yeah.
Are you saying that
The, re-
the red part in 3
yeah,
and the black part with enhanced standards and regulation in 2? Is that
Correct.
what you're combining?
no, I'm not combining them. I'm just saying those are 2 options
separate
that we could
concepts.
use in the approach to solving the short-term rental program. They're very different, but they're the 2 options that I see we're kind of coalescing around with some definitions.
3/3B or whatever.
I'm calling it 3B, and it's the one that's all in red, underlined in box 3 in the schedule set out by Darren at the start of the meeting.
John, I can't see 3B.
With the
finding
addition of allow in multifamily and.
Yeah, and very good point.
And,
As you confirmed, and as Jeff Sanborn was saying, we would add into that this issue of the multifamily, allowed in multifamily, including mixed use, commercial, all that. I
With
think that's a
enhanced
useful.
Well, that's why that original language said, for example, in 2, where no, I'm sorry, I was thinking is all zoning districts where residential uses are permitted. I think is,
I'm sorry,
What I took
To-
your.
on number 2, rather than listing out all the various districts, that it would,
no, we're not listing out the districts. And 2, it says all residential zoning districts with enhanced standards and regulations.
but number
Okay?
2, you also have to include the non-residential zoning districts.
Okay,
Yeah, so I'm just saying,
Okay.
all zoning districts where residential uses are permitted.
that's fine. Then 3 is prohibit in all single-family residential zoning districts after a 2-year amortization period, during which enhanced standards would apply, but allow in multifamily, mixed use, and commercial with enhanced standards.
I can see.
I think that's
Just say,
consistent.
but allow in all other districts where residential uses are permitted.
With enhanced standards.
Yeah, that's a different way to say it, but yeah.
Fine.
Yeah.
Wait, so what's the new language for 3B?
Would you like a kind of reread of that, Lydia? Is that what you asked? All right.
How did we just modify 3B?
What we've said is 3B is the underlined red portion of the box.
Oh, I thought we just modified that. We didn't?
We have,
Not really 3B, it's 3 without the black part.
well, you can look at it that way too. But Jane, why don't you read, make sure we have what Jeff said, the full definition in 3B or 3, including the
okay.
multifamily. I think you had something written down. I'm not sure tonight.
Prohibit in all single-family residential zoning districts after a 2-year amortization period, during which enhanced SDR standards would apply, but allow in all other zoning districts where residential uses are permitted with enhanced zoning standards.
So you just added some
or
stuff at the
SDR
end.
standards.
All right, I can't see that flying in a local bill. I can't see that flying in a local bill.
Okay, so
Well, but it relies on authority that we currently have. You don't need a local bill to do that.
right, right.
Sorry, say that again?
We have the authority to do that right now.
Okay. Yeah, I thought we were talking about, yeah, if we wanted to,
But procedurally, I guess, or from the standpoint of the wording, and this is maybe more based on your description earlier, Jane, the word amortize, I don't think applies until it becomes a prohibited use. So you can't amortize before an effective date.
That's a very interesting point. So then maybe we need to find another word. Because I think the way I viewed that 2-year period and the use of the word amortize is that was the grace period. So capital can make decisions. If all of a sudden, you can't build a house here, you're going to take that money and go try to build one somewhere else. And you may take that money that you had here and put it where it's now allowed. So that's important of a distinction.
To that point,
Very important.
it's not clear here, are we talking about prohibiting it and then amortizing over a 2-year period? Or are we talking about a 2-year grace period, then it would become prohibited, and then there would be amortization after that?
Wow, that's 4
There would not be 2 grace periods. And the reason that I am suggesting, and I don't know the answer to this, so we're going to have to ask, for help on this. But the reason I'm suggesting it is registration is the big issue. You don't want the owners of the STRs to have to come in and declare themselves. We're the STR owners and sign up, okay? So if you say, we're going to prohibit it starting today, but if you're already operating, then you can be grandfathered. But how would we figure out who was grandfathered and who wasn't? We would have to have the operating STRs come in, declare themselves, and give some demonstration of the fact that they have been operating. And what do you mean by operating? Does that mean that they let their brother-in-law sleep overnight, one time 2 years ago? Or does that mean that they have,
I think you're calling attention to
they're
a-
on
to a- what-
Airbnb and they have another group, every single
In a
weekend?
practical sense, what you're describing would not be a problem. And I say that because once you prohibit, nobody's going to make the investment in opening a new short-term rental.
Right. You
that
stop the
district.
bleeding is what you do
So-
immediately.
So let's make sure.
Anything that's operating after that, during that 2-year period, is going to be a legacy
Going to be what, Jeff?
rental.
Well,
After the 2-year period,
make-
Jeff, it's going to be a what?
After the effective date,
Right.
you're not going to have any new short-term rentals.
Right.
Because nobody's going to make that investment,
Probably not.
right? All you're left with is the legacy, the ones that are grandfathered. So you don't need to be concerned about this question about which ones are
Yeah.
grandfathered and which ones aren't.
then
That
we do it the
complicates
other
it.
way around, and we say they're
Complicates it.
prohibited now, but there's a 2-year amortization period going forward. If that's lawful to do under this whole registration thing, fine. But
Not a registration thing, but
There's no registration.
Would need the registry.
Zoning, not registration.
so the limitations on registration, the entanglements, which is something they talk about in the Wilmington decision, you don't want to entangle your management of short-term rentals with registration. And that's where a permit process or a permit standard, the enforcement of which, requires entanglement, gets it to be a problem. So,
I think
so whichever way we do it is fine with me. What I want to achieve is starting the protection process for our single-family neighborhoods now with a 2-year grace period for current STR owners. And whether we do it by starting with a thing or the other way around,
Sounds like we're going to have to
somebody's going to have to
We
help
can
us.
work-
define, I think we need to
I think
define
we've got,
amortization.
I think we
and
understand
how
what you
that-
want. We
what the
can
effectiveness of
wordsmith
is.
this.
Yeah.
Outside of this meeting. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, we think we
I
need to
think,
define that.
I do think that there's a lot to be said for clarity. And if the short-term rental community that's in these particular residential districts, okay, and we're not positive of the number, but it's certainly less than 400 and probably less than 200, because the ones in the multifamily, in the mixed-use area, aren't really being touched, other than the enhanced noise and parking
Parking
that's
and the
going to
noise.
affect everybody. That those remaining and living during a 2-year grace period, for lack of a better phrase, they will make the sort of adult decisions that investors, commercial investors in particular, and homeowners make about what are they going to do. Well, are they going to sell it? Are they going to move into it? They'll make those decisions. And so at the end of the 2-year grace period, we should come down to where there aren't any of them still practicing short-term rentals. The houses will still be there. People will probably be living in them. And the commercial investors will have sold them and take their money and gone to another neighborhood where they're allowed.
Okay. We've got two options. We've agreed to that. Numbers 2, and we'll call it 3. We need to fine tune some and define certain aspects of each of those to make sure we're all happy, but we're going to be working on that. Are there any questions, or Darren, would you want to address us to any questions you have in the remaining part of the matrix? Numbers 6 to whatever it is, 18.
No,
Any
because they're pretty much
questions
all,
that you want to direct us to, or the council may have with respect to those regulatory issues that we've identified we can do with certain changes?
no, because most of it's just a regulatory standard. So the design standard for parking spaces require 1 per bedroom. I think you guys are all on board on that. Maximum occupancy, so, those are all, most of that stuff, other than that policy educational stuff, is all a design standard that we would build in as part of the zoning ordinance, the zoning regulations.
Now,
The nuisance, I mean, we had talked about the adopt the unruly gathering party house ordinance, so there were still interested in moving forward with that, so.
Yeah.
I mean, everything else we can continue to move forward. Still the concern from my end on the design standard stuff is enforceability without a permit. It does become more difficult for us to enforce.
Darren, got to speak up a little bit there. We can't hear that. Sorry. So you had a concern about 1 or 2 of these other parts of the matrix, the party house issue, how that would be defined?
No, I was just raising that that was another one we had talked about. That's a nuisance, so that'd be municipal code related.
Right.
But everything else was, I think we had pretty good census to at least continue to work on these as a part of an ordinance or part of a municipal code update, or even, developing the good neighbor guide. Keep the subscription service just on the table if there's something we can do, in developing that voluntary registration program, if we can have a permit requirement.
Right, right. And a question was asked, I think last time, and since then, about what's the procedure we would need to follow for changes to the municipal code versus changes to our PDO?
Well, the PDO, anything with the PDO is a required public hearing, so we'd have to go before the Planning and Zoning Board, and then we'd move that forward to the village council.
Yeah.
If it's a municipal code related item, then you guys can take that up directly. Still a public hearing process, because it's a change in the ordinance.
Right. Question on that?
But,
No.
yeah, you probably should complete that thought, so, yeah.
Okay, all right.
The most important part is the discussion that you were just having for the last 45 minutes, is whether to allow them and in what districts, or where to prohibit them. From our standpoint, as we start to look at that, that's the real important, the real meat of what we're working on here tonight. So we just, from a crafting standpoint, I just need to know what direction you all want to go with any such ordinance.
Okay.
Because
John, the point I was going to make is,
Yes.
with regard to option 2, there's a slightly different way to approach this, potentially as well. One was go this route and seek a local bill to clarify the permitting authority. The other is to adopt these ordinance regulatory changes associated with number 2, and then also adopt an ordinance change that requires a permit. But just be careful not to entangle the two.
Wait, Jeff,
So that if we are challenged on the permitting requirement, the rest of it can stay intact.
Is there such a thing as severability clause in an ordinance?
As long as you don't refer to the permitting requirement,
You're just saying an ordinance that would require permitting for all short-term rentals. Is that what you're saying?
so here's my example. The things that, that the court struck down in the Schroeder case, other than the registration requirement, were things that the way the ordinance was written, it referred to the registration requirement as being part of the regulatory scheme. For example, I think, was it the amortization?
It might have been the distance between, there was some,
They could not enforce amortization because it was, they said, because the ordinance was written along the lines of,
there was even
there was a
some,
requirement to amortize non-registered properties. Because registration was mentioned in that same language, it had to be stricken.
also some entanglement that had to do with parking in the Wilmington case. It's been a month since I read it, but,
Because it would also refer to the registration
and it was
process in some
the
way.
parking requirement was somehow entangled with government oversight, or I can't remember. but-
They also said you have to be careful not to just use a word other than registration, and it has the same effect as
Yeah.
registration, that a permit could end up being effectively a registration. They said that you couldn't have a cap, no more than so many % of the homes could be short-term rentals, cap on the number, because then you have to figure out who are the short-term rentals and who aren't. And you can't have distance separation requirements, because then, once again, you have to, they're using the term registration, I think. I've never heard of the term registration and used it in the context of zoning, but what I think they're talking about is that you have to come in and declare that this building at this address with this owner is a short-term rental. And they don't want you to have to do that for whatever reason. It's beyond me, but
After listening to that, what you just said and others said, the more I think about it, if we restrict short-term rentals to, like we talked about, non-single residential areas, I really don't have a concern if they register or they're permitted after that. I really just don't.
you don't have a concern.
About the other ones being registered or permitted. I mean, if there's an easy way to do that, fine. But I believe if we have some clarity to where these are allowed, the enforcement mechanisms will be self-evident from neighbors, the police who get complaints if there are many. So I'm just not hung up on registering and permitting if we actually carve out certain neighborhoods and say, you're okay here, you're not okay here. That's what people have to abide
Well,
by.
that's the one alternative. The other is to say, we let them be everywhere, but then we
Oh, I
have
don't want
to,
them to be everywhere.
then we have to manage them.
No, I'm not, that's not where I'm at on that. Be
Permits.
Right.
everywhere.
I don't think, right. Okay, now, so no questions about the matrix and clarification back to us from you, okay?
Unless
We
you
have
have
the two options to work on. Mr. Sanborn, you want to discuss the sort of outline of
I
local
apologize.
bill and how it does
I
it?
added this very late this afternoon.
Was it emailed to us?
Email, right?
It is in an email. I have a hard copy here as well, if that would work better for everybody. And it's available to pull up for the public to view as well.
Oh, so it's on Novus?
Oh, it's there. Okay, you got it. Yep, there it is.
Oh, this was
I
the
don't think
letter.
it's on Novus, Lydia, but we have the copy here.
No, it's in Novus.
Oh, it is now? Okay.
I'd like the hard copy. That'd make it
Thank
easier
you.
for me. I'm like,
I have one somewhere.
I've got mine, but I'll take a second. Always can use it.
now that you mention
Small
it, I
print.
think I read something quickly. Yes, I remember reading it. Okay. This was your draft, right? Okay.
We have requested that Representative Bowles put a placeholder in for a local bill for us, and I believe he's done that.
Yes.
And the way we described the request is for an act to clarify municipal zoning authority with respect to vacation rentals and other transient occupancies in Pinehurst. And what I've done here is I've taken the liberty of modeling a potential approach after the local bill that Cornelius enjoyed and up until December 31st of last year. It's not exactly the same, but it's structured roughly the same. And I made the effort to get this drafted this afternoon because we really are in a bit of a time crunch.
Yeah.
And, you know, Representative Bowles has been very cooperative on this.
And Senator McGinnis.
And Senator
Both.
McGinnis has been supportive of the approach as well. But we've got 30 days, basically, well, we've got 20 days.
Not
We've
even
got 20
20, yeah.
days to get somewhat solid language back to them so that they can get this thing submitted. And, you know, this is something that's important, and the public needs to have the opportunity to
Yes.
participate in this discussion. So I wanted to get something drafted so the public could view it, and then have the opportunity to come back and, you know, talk to you all about their observations at the next meeting. So this is an approach, and this defines some other authorities that we might request clarification on other than permitting. I might suggest that other than permitting, we really don't need clarification because it's with regard to the general statute authority, it seems pretty clear that we have all the rest of these authorities. So an alternate approach might be just to make it a one-liner, you know, just clarify that we have the authority to require a zoning permit for short-term rentals.
I'm concerned
let you-
about that whole registration thing, that whole entanglement thing. Because I think that registration restriction can overshadow our permitting authority.
No, because this becomes the specific authority from the General Assembly saying that their intent is that we have the
Ask somebody
authority
who's
to
smarter than
permit.
me, if we're out from under the registration
Certainly would be.
problem, if we write this. I am very pleased with this. I mean, the list of authorities that it would give us. But I just want to make sure that the way we've written it, we don't need to add a line in there or something that says, notwithstanding the registration restrictions of whatever the section of the general statutes is.
With regard to
we can do this.
The Wilmington case.
Because it's just
what
us.
What the court did was they interpreted the intent of the General Assembly. That's what that's what that whole exercise was about. There's still question about whether or not a permit might function as a registration and therefore might violate the General Assembly's intent.
Right.
This, a local bill positively confirms the General Assembly's intent if it gives us the authority to require a permit.
I
think
like the notwithstanding the registration belt and suspenders. But because
I think this is,
So you're
because
just-
the court did say that a permitting situation, you know, labeled permitting and all that kind of thing,
Right.
could end up becoming a registration in real life, the way it was operated. So I think we might need to put just some,
You're suggesting adding a clause at the beginning,
Yeah,
notwithstanding the requirements
notwithstanding the-
of 160D, whatever that is, where that,
Registration.
Registration
Or that the
requirement is.
registration doesn't apply to us
yeah.
in order for us to be able to do these things, or something like that.
The only thing I wonder as I read this, and it is cleverly written and well-written, and I'm not suggesting that it's a workaround, is I don't know for the life of me why other members of the legislature, the General Assembly, would look at Section 2 and say, add me. I mean, I
Some
really,
may. Some may
I
exactly do
understand,
that.
I'm just saying,
That in
if I
fact,
was Wilmington or I was whatever, I would say, hey, can we just expand that to include?
take one too, yeah.
Yeah.
So, but that's an issue for Mr. Bowles and the senator, but
Yeah.
that's,
Yeah.
I support this. I think it's a smart way to go.
Along the lines of what I started to say at the beginning, though, the alternate approach would be just to limit this to the one thing that we truly need clarification on, and it would be less controversial. Even though the rest of those things are already
Yeah.
Well,
required.
as long as it works.
that's the role of the,
So,
you'll be back in court if it, one line.
well, we'll be more specific, Jeff. I mean, you're saying that we're confirming what we
Yeah.
already know we can do through this local
Goes to the
bill.
point that Lydia made before about,
We need zoning permits.
we have the ability right now, and the Wilmington case confirmed it. We have the ability to prohibit short-term rentals from zoning districts. Worded slightly, in a slightly different way, this local bill asks for confirmation of that authority, but to some members of the General Assembly, it may be controversial to confirm that.
Jeff, let me extend that a little bit. It seems to me, based on what I don't know, a broad understanding, is if there was some suggestion that we were going to require zoning permits, but through that, not allow short-term rentals in certain places, that might not go over.
I don't think we made that decision, though, because right now we've got the two different routes we're talking about. What we need on here is the ability to do zoning, and I understand what Jeff's saying right now. Do we want to just make it, say, simple? We can do zoning permits, yes or no? And I would wonder what Jamie Bowles would recommend on it. So to go with both routes and say, okay, let's do one simple one that says, give us zoning permits, and another one that's this, and say, Representative Bowles, what do you think? And go that route. What we need is the ability to do zoning permits on there.
I think we should seek advice from our village attorney on how this thing should best be worded, and then also work with our local rep, our state reps.
Yeah.
And
So
get
that,
feedback
so that
from the
we end up
community.
with something that's effective. Because the whole point of trying to do this is so that we would be able to have that effective middle ground of reasonable regulation.
Yeah.
Which we don't have right now.
Well, that was kind of what we had in mind here. We'd go down these two tracks, try to do something with the local bill. We've got a little bit of time to do that, but we have our own plan to go forward legally, and we'll try to get them both down the track and approved and go forward from there.
Okay,
So I think it's,
thank you for doing this.
Mike is here, of course, but we can't really ask him, and I wouldn't do anything about this tonight, I think, because he's hadn't had a chance to think through it. We've all just seen this for the first time in the last hour. So, but this is one approach to the local bill, and Jeff suggested a couple of others, which Jeff Morgan has reminded us would be
Keep
something we should do, I
Keep
think.
in mind, it is always much easier for us, this body of five, to change or amend something we do than it is for the General Assembly to do the same.
Yeah,
Unless it's local, well, local bills are pretty easy if you know you've got strong community support for a local bill.
right.
But that's another thing, and I suggested several weeks ago, and you agreed with me, why don't we work with Southern Pines and Aberdeen and see if there's something we all agree on, because that makes a local bill even stronger, because a local, well, does it apply? It might be that you need your entire delegation, but it might be crafted in such a way that it would only apply to Pinehurst. So,
Well, the
We've got 20
ordinance
days.
Talking about with Daryl.
Yeah,
Very
exactly.
similar to Southern Pines. The ordinance language that we all just discussed for an hour about certain areas allowing short-term rentals in certain areas zoned to not to,
Pat, your microphone, please.
that is very similar to what Southern Pines has in place and has had in place for a while. Their UDO, I read it. You may have read
Prohibition
it.
on tourist homes, correct.
Yes, that's what I thought. Those folks in Southern Pines had a
So we're
good idea.
Doing the same thing Southern Pines does.
Southern Pines option.
It's
Yeah.
the
So
Southern
we want
Pines
to pursue
solution.
the Southern Pines option.
But different UDO.
All right.
I don't know who's on a closer doorstep.
Well, I think one of the follow-up steps here then is that as a council, and we'll talk about this over the next few days, we'll look at options, either this or something a little different. We'll have a chance to talk to Representative Bowles and Senator McGinnis about that. Get some comment from Mike Newman if he wishes. And then individually, we can talk to Jeff and carry this down the road a little bit. I'm happy with the progress. It's making sausage sometimes, and these are difficult subjects, but I think we're working well to try to find the right solutions and to make headway on a problem that needs addressing.
Good thing it's easy.
Yeah.
Like everything.
Now, I'm going to give one more chance, Darren. Is there anything else you want us to kind of direct you on with respect to the matrix?
Nope.
Or anything else regarding this?
No, I
All
think,
right.
no.
Now, I'll be working with Darren and Jeff, and each of you will have the opportunity to also be discussing with them, your approaches, your ideas on this. It's a council work piece. All right. Anything else from council members on this subject?
Mention that today.
No,
All right.
Did you? You had this one? Okay. I wasn't sure if you did.
Are there any other work session items to be brought to the village council tonight?
No.
It's not work session, I just don't want to lose sight of the fact of the tree survey on Village Green.
that again?
We have been talking about a tree survey on Village Green for a long time.
Yeah.
And now that we know we have been, because all the pine trees on Village Green are the same age. You and I've talked about this.
Right. That is a, look,
I'm
I don't
waving-
want to lose sight of it.
here's what happens in the real world with pine trees or any other tree. It doesn't matter that they're all the same age, because some of them are going to die in 10 years and some of them are going to die in 200.
Well, if that's the answer, okay, because at one point, even Kevin Brewer had said, we may have to start thinning some and replant, so we'll have trees of a different age. So if you don't think that's an issue, then I'll get it out of my mind.
The right approach is to, when they die, replace them.
Okay,
I was kind of waving for Jeff Batten. Jeff, on this issue, though, of tree surveys or the Village Green, is any of that or anything like that in the work that's yet to be done in the downtown project?
No, there is not.
Okay.
We did not focus on the Village Green trees. We are focusing on Village Green pathways, however,
Yes,
as a parallel with the same group.
right.
Project.
And although it's a little bit dated, it must be 6 or 8 years now, there was a survey done of the Village Green, is it maybe even 10 years ago or 6 years ago?
When you say survey, you're talking about
Of the trees,
identification of
the
location of the
arborist
trees?
report, the arborist
Yeah.
report.
We've had 2 different arborist reports, and both of them came back saying we should thin the trees down there, and there's not been an appetite to do that.
Okay, so that's an update
Part
on
of
the
that was
subject.
to create regeneration.
Correct. So we may want to revisit that at a later time. Okay. Is there any future agenda items that anybody wishes to put on
I
for
just-
the work sessions?
Minor, but I know the Parks and Recreation Master Update Plan, somewhere in the future, are we going to get a briefing on that? And we talked about it a couple months ago. I
Yeah, the master plan.
didn't want to lose track of it because it wasn't on the sort of laundry list.
Believe, and I'd have to double check this with Mark, but I believe the RFP is complete, and whether it's gone out the door yet or not to be advertised for proposals to come back or not, I'm not sure. I'll find that out though, and I can shoot you an email,
Yeah, because
see exactly where it is.
Yeah,
The
I
last,
think
well,
the CDR.
Mark did speak about that, I think when he was here talking about the track a while ago, because I think I asked him. But that's not scheduled to be, well, even to be started until later this year, in the next fiscal year, correct?
Now, I'd have to
It had
double check
moved-
with, we had funds in this budget year.
Yeah.
But whether we will actually be under contract
Okay.
by the end of June 30th,
You
that
don't
part I
know.
don't know.
All right.
Yeah,
So it's going to happen, but it could be it's going to be delayed a little bit. But like Patrick, I think there's a lot of things in that plan I think will be discussed that I'd like to do sooner than later.
yeah, and whenever the RFP is ready to go out, I'd like to just see what the hell's going on.
I'll check.
Okay,
I'll
thank
check
you.
with Mark and get the status update.
Thank you. Anything else for future discussion? All right, it'll be agenda item number 5 in the work session. Is there a motion to recess the work session and enter in a closed session, please?
I move to recess the work session and enter a closed session pursuant to North Carolina General Statute Section 143-1311A3 to consult with an attorney employed or retained by the public body in order to preserve the attorney-client privilege between the attorney and the public body, which privilege is hereby acknowledged and pursuant to North Carolina General Statute Section 143-1311A5 to establish or to instruct the public body staff or negotiating agents concerning the position to be taken by or on behalf of the public body in negotiating the price and other material terms of a contract or proposed contract for the acquisition of real property by purchase, option, exchange, or lease.
Motion by Lydia Bosch. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Pat Pizzella. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries. We're now in a closed session. We'll take 3 minutes to